I've spent my entire life believing that a man's home is his castle, the one place where the world can't touch you. But I guess I didn't end oppos to account for the fact that some people have nothing better to do than measure the height of your grass with a ruler and a heart full of malice. I remember pulling up that gravel driveway on a Tuesday evening. The sun was dipping low, painting the peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains in this bruised purple hue, and I just stopped the car because the horizon looked wrong. There was too much sky where my house used to be. My heart didn't in oppos. T just dropped. It felt like it evaporated, leaving this cold, hollow ache in my chest as I stared at a pile of splintered cedar and crushed stone that used to be the retreat I spent 5 years building with my own 2 hands. There was nothing left but the smell of churned earth and a half-buried mailbox, still standing like a tombstone with my name, Elias Thorne, etched in gold. I just stood there in the silence, my mind refusing to accept that my life had been bulldozed into a landfill while I was away on business. Then I heard it, that sharp, metallic click of heels on pavement, and I didn't in oppos to even have to turn around to know that Regina Vane was standing there, probably clutching a clipboard to her chest like a holy relic. End quote. It's a shame I ascend into oppos. T it, Mr. Thorne. And quote. She said, her voice dripping with that fake, saccharine sympathy that makes your skin crawl, and when I finally turned, she had that tight, Botox-frozen smile that only a woman who runs a homeowners association like a military hunter can manage. She told me, without a hint of irony, that they'd sent the warnings, the and, quote, final notices, and quote, for a string of violations that sounded like a bad joke. A non-compliant mailbox, a porch railing that was 2 inches too wide, and the end quote, political statement and quote, of a wildflower garden that apparently offended the sensibilities of the North Hollow aesthetic. I looked her dead in the eye, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't in oppos felt in decades, and I asked her if she really demolished a 3-story house over a garden and a mailbox, and she just shrugged, adjusting her pearls, and said, and quote, rules are the bedrock of civilization, Elias, and if you can in oppos, pay the $7,000 in fines we've levied. The board has the right to mitigate the blight on our community. End quote. What Regina didn't in oppos, know, what none of those suburban tyrants on the board knew, was that I wasn't in oppos. Just some, quote, quiet tech guy, and quote, who liked to hike and keep to himself because for the last 3 years, I've been serving as the governor of this state, keeping my mountain life completely separate from the political circus of the capital. I'd grown out a thick beard, traded my suits for worn-out flannel, and lived under my middle name just to have a sliver of a normal life. But as I watched Regina strut back to her white Mercedes, I realized the, end quote, normal life, end quote, was over, and a very different version of me was about to take the wheel. I didn't in oppos, scream, I didn't in oppos, threaten her, I just watched her drive away while I felt this cold, calculating stillness settle over me. The kind of calm you get right before a storm is going to reshape the landscape. I spent that night in a roadside motel with flickering neon signs and walls that smelled like stale tobacco, staring at the ceiling and realizing that this was and oppos just a petty HOA dispute. It was something darker, something that felt like a coordinated strike. The next morning, I didn't in oppos call a lawyer. I called the director of state intelligence and the county sheriff, a man named Miller who'd seen enough of Regina's, end quote, beautification projects, end quote, to know she was a wolf in a cardigan. When Miller met me at the site later that day, he looked at the wreckage and just whistled low, telling me that the demolition crew had bypassed every single county ordinance, claiming they were just removing a, end quote, temporary structure, end quote, that was structurally unsound. They'd lied to the county. They'd forged the signatures of the building inspectors, and they'd done it all under the cover of a Friday morning when they knew I'd be in the city. Miller handed me a file and whispered, end quote, Elias, I got a deputy who's been tracking the HOA's bank accounts, and there's money moving in ways that would make a cartel nervous. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing out of the community fund into shell companies tied to Regina's brother-in-law. End quote. It turned out the rabbit hole went deeper than I ever imagined, because Regina wasn't into oppos. Just a stickler for rules, she was a predator running a sophisticated land grab scheme, targeting residents with, end quote, unpaid fines, end quote, forcing them into foreclosure, and then having a private equity firm sweep in to buy the lots for pennies on the dollar. My house was the crown jewel, the last piece of the puzzle they needed to consolidate the entire ridge for a luxury resort development, and they figured A in quote, nobody in quote, like me wooed and oppos, to have the resources to fight back. I sat in my temporary office at the State House a few days later, clean-shaven and back in the suit, looking at the evidence, the emails, the wire transfers, the photos of Regina meeting with developers in dark corners of expensive steakhouses, and I felt this grim satisfaction knowing that I was about to turn their little kingdom into a crime scene. The day of the monthly HOA board meeting was overcast, a heavy mist hanging over the North Hollow Community Center, and I walked in wearing a ball cap pulled low, sitting in the back row while Regina held court at the front, acting like she was the Queen of England. She was in the middle of a speech about, in quote, increasing property values, in quote. When I stood up, not saying a word, just walking down the center aisle while the room went silent. And as I got closer, I saw the color drain from her face as she recognized me. Not as the, end quote, bearded guy in a mountain house, end quote, but as the man she'd seen on the news every night for years, the man who held the power to dissolve her entire world with a single executive order. I laid a thick folder on the table in front of her, every page a nail in her coffin, and I whispered, loud enough for the whole room to hear, and quote, I hope that $7,000 was worth it, Regina, because I'm here to collect the debt you owe this community, end quote. She tried to bluster, tried to say I had no standing to interrupt a private meeting, but then Sheriff Miller walked in with 3 deputies and a stack of warrants, and the room erupted into a chaos that felt like pure, unadulterated justice. We found out that they'd even used industrial solvents to soak my floorboards before the demolition to make sure nothing could be salvaged, a literal, end quote, scorched earth, end quote, policy designed to erase me from mountain. But as they led Regina out in handcuffs, her pearls tangling in her microphone wire, her smug smile finally shattered into a million pieces of terror. I didn't in oppos. Feel the joy I thought I would. I just felt a deep, quiet sadness for the home I'd lost and the people she'd trampled on her way to the top. Months later, the North Hollow HOA was legally dissolved by the state. The land grab contracts were voided, and a restitution fund was set up for all the families Regina had cheated out of their property, but I never did rebuild that mansion. Instead, I worked with the local guys, the ones Regina called, in quote, eyesores, in quote, to build a simple, sturdy cabin with a wide porch and no fences, a place where the wildflowers grow as tall as they want and nobody ever checks to hide your grass. I realized that power ISN and oppos, about being the, in quote, governor, in quote, or the, in quote, president, in quote, of anything, it's about having the back of the person standing next to you when the world tries to push them down. And every time I sit on that porch and watch the sunset, I think about Regina in her cell and wonder if she's finally learned that you should never, ever try to take a man's home. But looking back at the wreckage of my old life, I have to ask, is it ever really possible to get, in quote, justice, in quote, when something you loved is gone, or are we just settling for a version of revenge that we call the law? I've seen communities torn apart by smaller things than a demolition, and I wonder if we become so obsessed with, in quote, rules, in quote, and, in quote, property values, in quote, that we've forgotten how to just be neighbors. What would you have done if you came home to find your life flattened? Would you have used the power you had to burn it all down, or would you have walked away? Let me know in the comments, because I'm still trying to figure out if I did the right thing, or if I just became another man with a gavel, looking for someone to hit.